Episode 15 opens on a spinning wheel, and we have ourselves a nice little montage of a bright red moped careening through the streets and around corners. We pan out to see an excited Ruby riding on the moped, screeching up to the front of the Anima Arc house early in the morning, where an unamused Weiss is standing. She shakes her head at Ruby, asking, "It's 5 a.m. Why are you so happy?" Ruby smiles and says, "Well, normally they have me lugging around a whole bunch of paper and boxes and stuff, but today I got to move around munitions. I've only ever seen artillery shells on the net." Weiss, deadpan, asks, "Why were they having you carry around artillery shells on a scooter?" Ruby blinks and puts a finger to her head in confusion before shrugging. "I didn't really think to ask." Weiss shakes her head as Yang and Blake walk out the front door. Yang is seemingly fine, but Blake has heavy bags under her eyes. Yang takes one look at Ruby and says, "Every time I see you on that thing, it looks more and more ridiculous." Ruby pouts and says back, "Well, I was either riding with Tara or on Bumblebee, and you never let me ride on Bumblebee. Besides, I think it looks cool." Weiss looks to Yang, confused. "Really? You've never given her a ride?" Yang scoffs. "She runs faster than it!" And Ruby snaps, "It's not the same, my legs get tired!" Blake groans and says, "Can you please talk more quietly? I was on wall duty yesterday and I had to pull a double shift." Yang shoots Ruby a look, earning a roll of her eyes in return, only to turn to Blake and say, "Then you should probably ride with Ruby. She still needs a tune-up, she's a bit loud." Weiss asks, "Are you talking about your bike or Ruby?" Earning a "Hey!" from Ruby, and a "You know what I mean" from Yang. As the crew load up, Blake asks, somewhat irritated, "Why are we doing this?" Ruby shrugs as Blake settles in behind her. Team building?" And Weiss cuts in from behind Yang. "Because it's awkward as hell inside the house, and talking with the old lady that saved our lives is as good excuse as any to get out of there." The four look to each other after that bold assessment, give silent nods of acknowledgement, and pull away from the curb, heading off down the road. We arrive in front of a normal suburban home where Maria is waiting outside. Our four girls pull up and discover that Blake has passed out on Ruby's back. Weiss and Yang dismount while Ruby tries unsuccessfully to nudge Blake awake. She looks to Yang, pleading for help, and Yang gives a "I don't know what to do" hand gesture. To both of their surprise, Weiss walks up and flicks Blake on the forehead. Blake shoots to awareness, blinking away her sleepiness, and Weiss just says, "Ruby can't walk with you sleeping on her. Get up." Blake, in a sleepy daze, stumbles off the bike and stretches. Weiss is the first to head towards Maria, and Maria immediately says, "There's coffee inside." Weiss quickens her step, and she and Blake are the first to enter the house, followed by Ruby on her crutch and Yang, who lingers just behind in case Ruby falls. Inside we find Weiss and Blake sitting on a couch, both completely at peace while sipping down fresh coffee. Ruby and Yang are standing at the kitchen island, where Ruby is stuffing her face with sweetbread. Yang asks, looking at Ruby's leg, "Wouldn't you rather sit down?" And Ruby responds, mouth full, "The bread is like cookies." Maria takes the empty pot of coffee off the maker and grabs Ruby by the cloak, saying, "You've stuffed your face enough. Come on, we have a lot to discuss." Ruby complains, "But I'm not done yet," before barely managing to swipe another piece of bread. Yang watches in confusion, asking back to the zenned out Weiss and Blake, Are we supposed to follow? Guys?" Ruby is dragged up the stairs and through the main hallway to Maria's study. The rest of the team follow behind slowly, curious, and as they do, we get passing shots of framed pictures in Maria's house of different people, most prominently what appears to be her former team of four. Ruby is pulled into Maria's study where Maria opens the window. There's a puff of dust as she does, and she waves it away, saying, "Oh, I haven't opened these in a while." She walks over to a comfy chair and sits down, motioning for the girls to sit on the rug in front of her. The four awkwardly sit down in an open circle towards Maria. Ruby asks as she finishes sitting, Are we going to talk about the silver eyes thing?" And Maria responds, "Depends on your answer. Depends on all of your answers." Blake asks, "What does this have to do with us? I thought it was just Ruby." Maria shakes her head. "Well, you see, once I teach her, she won't be able to unlearn it. Can't unring the bell. You all need to be okay with that." Ruby narrows her eyes. "Why would I want to unlearn it?" And Maria snaps, "Are y'all gonna let me talk?" The team is visibly taken aback by the snippiness and go quiet. "Good, quiet. I like that. Now where was I? Yes. Are you okay with losing who you are?" Ruby leans forward, now more confused. "What do you mean?" And Maria replies, "How willing are you to sacrifice yourself?" Ruby's response is tepid. My life? Maria again shakes her head. "No, yourself, your very being. Are you all willing to lose Ruby Rose and welcome whatever is left? Someone different. Someone who doesn't remember the victories you shared or the miseries you experienced. Your highs and lows. Would you stand by her?" There's a brief quiet before Weiss asks, "Would she still be Ruby?" And Maria throws it back at her. "Do you think she'd still be Ruby?" Weiss looks over to Ruby with consternation, but the camera jumps over to Yang as she says, definitively, "Of course she would be." Blake shares Weiss's concerned glance and asks, "Would it be worth it?" And Maria replies, "It's what you make of it. I already know what Miss Rose's answer will be. I need to hear all of yours." Ruby turns to look at her team, and Yang looks to Maria, saying, "I'm in." Slowly, Blake also agrees, nodding her head silently. The last holdout is Weiss, whose fingers are clutching at her shawl. She is silent before saying, "I want us to hear it." Ruby looks at her and asks, "Are you sure?" Weiss gives Ruby a somber smile, before saying, "I'm not totally sure, but I can't be the best teammate ever if I can't trust you." Ruby gives a soft smile before going serious and turning to Maria. "Well then," Maria begins, "memory is the key. I suspect you've only experienced Silver Eyes when in moments of intense emotion, times when you've been threatened or someone you cared about was in grave danger or you felt alone and scared. Ruby, what do you feel when you recall a fond memory?" Ruby's brow perks. "Warm? Loved, maybe?" Maria prods deeper. "And the bad memories?" Ruby's face sinks. "Sad? Empty? Abandoned?" There's a quick cut of Yang looking at Ruby, knowing but sad. Maria nods, saying, "Those emotions are fueled by your memories, and those emotions are the light behind the silver eyes. The stronger the emotion, the more powerful the light. That comes at a cost. Every time you recall one of those memories, to get one of those emotions, a little bit of that memory erodes." Maria holds up a book, obviously damaged and worn. She flips through its pages. "It's like a book you've read too many times. The words start to fade, the pages start to fall out, the spine falls apart, and suddenly..." Maria holds up the book by one cover, and a whole sheaf of paper slides out. "An entire chapter is gone." Ruby watches the sheaf fall, and her eyes widen as the implication finally lands. Her three teammates look at her with alarm. Ruby sees her eyes reflected in Maria's goggles. She mumbles absently, "I'm going to lose all my memories?" Maria rocks her head side to side. "Not unless you're really reckless. Use it carefully and you'll barely notice the difference. And hopefully your friends will be there to fill in any blanks that crop up. It sounds bad, but everyone begins to forget as they get older. Only difference is, you get the choice of whether or not that happens sooner rather than later." Weiss shakes her head. "That sounds horrible." Maria looks to Weiss and shrugs. "It is, to some." Yang scratches her chin and says, "I don't know. There's a few memories I'd rather not have." Blake, deep in thought, asks, "Would you get rid of them, though? Can you really say you're only your good memories?" Yang crosses her arms and says, "You wouldn't get rid of them? Blake, the whole time I've known you, you've either been trying to run away or fix your mistakes. Wouldn't you rather not have those?" Blake's shoulders raise, getting heated. "Those mistakes are a part of who I am. You of all people should know that. Didn't you cross a whole continent just to meet your mom?" Yang tries to get a word in. "That's not..." But Blake overpowers her verbally. "Isn't that just the same as telling Weiss to ignore her family legacy?" Weiss's back straightens when her name is mentioned, confused and concerned as she stares at Blake. Again, Yang tries to interject. "Blake..." But Blake ignores her. "Or telling Ruby to..." Yang's voice finally cuts through, laced with venom. "Wait, what about Ruby?" Blake is taken aback. "What about Ruby? Yang, you can't be that blind. Giving bad calls up on the train, getting us stranded in the forest, dropping the relic down the well." Ruby looks between the two, trying to get a word in edgewise as Yang snaps back. "Those were hard calls, Blake. Leaders have to make them all the time." Blake leans back, baffled. Who was she leading with all those calls? Because she looked far more at home with Team Ranger. By this point, voices are raising, Yang and Blake have stood, and RWBY and Weiss are trying to stop the argument as it escalates. RWBY barely manages to break through. Where is this coming from? Blake turns to RWBY and says, "You don't see it, do you? Our entire trip up to Argus, you've been more of a leader to them than to us. You left Beacon, you abandoned Yang just to go on an adventure with them." RWBY cuts in, defending herself. "They needed me! We needed each other!" Blake snarls. "Yang needed you. I know you feel guilty about Pyrrha, but you can't replace her, RWBY." The room goes silent, and RWBY begins to tremble. Her eyes streaking with tears and her teeth grinding, she quietly bites out, "You know, Yang wasn't the only one hurt when you left." Blake freezes, her eyes widening in shame. RWBY turns to Maria and asks, very bitterly, "Where's your workbench?" Maria, having watched the whole scene silently, puts a hand on RWBY's shoulder and guides her out the door. "Right this way." The other three watch them leave, and Weiss stares at the floor, contemplative. She looks to Yang and Blake and says, "I'm going to need more coffee," before walking out of the room. Yang and Blake are left alone, and Yang glares at Blake. "Good going." Blake puts a hand to her chest. "Me? I'm right, Yang, and you know I'm right. I know she's your sister, but you can't keep babying her. She's made mistakes. Didn't Weiss almost die at Haven?" Yang retorts, "Well, maybe she wouldn't have if you had just been..." Yang stops mid-sentence, the venom dying in her throat. Immediately, Yang forces her shoulders to relax, and she quickly walks to the door. "I need to leave." Blake watches her go, face conflicted, before her body sags and her narrowed eyes begin to tear up. A special thanks goes out to all of my wonderful patrons for supporting the channel. If you like this content and want more of it, please consider supporting it. Also consider picking up my new action-adventure novel, The Artificer, which is now available for purchase on Amazon in digital and in print. With that all said, back to your regularly scheduled fixing. We cut to Weiss walking out into Maria's garden with a cup of coffee, sitting and enjoying the view of the bay. As she watches, she pulls out the wooden Nevermore and holds it against her chest, closing her eyes. Out front, Yang sits beside her bike with a set of tools, finicking with the guts. Maria walks out and sits on the steps, commenting, "I thought you'd have left by now after all that." Yang rolls her eyes and says, "I would have if my bike worked. The people that fixed her didn't know what they were doing. They even messed with my seat." She presses down on it and it wobbles. "It's not even adjustable. I don't know how they did that." Maria begins to talk, completely bypassing Yang's comment. "Your bike isn't the only thing that needs work." Yang barely spares her a glance. "Not now, Granny. I've got too much on my plate." She's exaggeratedly rough with her repairs as she rambles. "I've got a fuming mad sister with laser dementia, my friend's group is collapsing, Weiss isn't here when she said she would be, and Blake... Yang trails off, and Maria is about to get a word in when Yang continues. "I don't know what her problem is. She blew up on RWBY for no reason. Well, not for no reason, but she didn't have to do it like that. RWBY didn't deserve that. I just can't deal with her. I mean, even before this, she keeps apologizing to me, profusely, for things we already went over. Like, I get it, but I already accepted her apology. I don't know why she's making it weird. Trying to win me shit at the festival, trying to say she'll protect me, always trying to lift things for me. She just won't stop." Maria perks and just kind of casually says, "Sounds like she's a mess. Also sounds like she's trying to make amends. Failing, but trying." Yang turns to Maria, pointing with a wrench. "But she..." The words die in her mouth. Blake... is... trying." Yang rests the wrench in her lap, eyes wide. Maria just looks at Yang and says, "Yeah, that's what I said." Weiss walks out the front door with 2 cups of coffee and looks to Yang, saying, "Hey Yang, you feeling up to talk? I got you coffee, black and 5 sugars, how you like it." Yang looks up to her and says, somewhat confused, "Actually, I think I'm alright. Maria's been really helpful." Maria silently raises a brow. Weiss looks between the two and deflates. "Oh, that's good, I guess." Yang walks up, takes the mug, and nudges Weiss reassuringly. "Thanks for the coffee, though." As the two enter the house, Yang says, "Don't worry, Weiss, I'm sure Ruby would love to have someone to talk to." Weiss perks at the thought and speed walks up the stairs, but when she turns the bend, Blake is already entering the weapon bench room of the house. Yang, just behind Weiss, sees this and steps forward, but Weiss stops her, silently communicating that this conversation needs to play out. We zoom in on Ruby working on Crescent Rose, silently toiling away at adjustments. Blake shuffles up behind Ruby and asks quietly, "Ruby, can we talk?" Ruby doesn't respond in any way and continues her work. Blake continues talking anyway. "I want to say I'm sorry about what I said. It wasn't right, and it wasn't fair for what I put you through, everyone through. I didn't plan to yell at you like that. I was frustrated. Things haven't felt the same since Beacon, and I guess I got carried away. You guys have been through so much, and Ruby sets down her tools, audibly, catching Blake's attention. Blake recoils, expecting a tirade. Very quietly, Ruby says, "You were right." Tears fall on the workbench and Crescent Rose. "I'm mad. At you? I'm mad at me?" Ruby turns and looks Blake in the eye. "So much of what you said was right, and I haven't been seeing it. Between Haven and the Relic and Oz, I guess I just lost sight. I took for granted we could all just pick up where we left off." Blake adds softly, "But things are different now. We're not at Beacon." Ruby nods and begins to smile, soft but genuine. "I miss the days where all I had to worry about was failing an assignment." Blake adds on, smiling too, "I think the bigger problem for you was falling asleep in class." Ruby chuckles out. "Says the girl that passed out on her way here." Blake shrugs. "You got me there." They're both quiet before Ruby grabs Blake by the hands and says, "I promise, from now on, things will be different. I'll make it up to you and the team, and I'll do my best to get us back there, to where we were at Beacon." Blake shakes her head. "Ruby, there's no way we can go back to that." Ruby winces and begins to pull her hands back, only for Blake to reaffirm the grip and pull them closer. "But we can try for something new. Something better than we ever would have been back then." Ruby smiles at Blake, much fuller now, and says, "Together." Blake nods. "Together." From the hallway, we hear Weiss enthusiastically cheer with her fist in the air. "Together!" Yang looks shocked at Weiss, but blinks to awareness and sees Blake and Ruby staring at her before hastily saying, "Together!" and throwing her own fist in the air. Inadvertently, she ends up throwing her coffee mug in the air and it shatters against the ground. In the distance, we hear Maria yell, "What was that sound?" before we cut to black, ending the episode.